Sometimes I think like we're the fish in a giant coral reef that the medium is air instead of water. When I think of it like that, I look up at the trees and go, "Wow, that is wild." So yeah, I've always been interested in that kind of thing, and I've always loved the outdoors, and I've always given a toss about nature.
Welcome to the Food Garden Life Show. We think that growing and cooking together builds families and builds communities.
Our goal is to inspire and inform with stories and ideas about gardening, food, and people, and we give gardeners permission and confidence to challenge the rules.
Brought to you by Emma and Stephen Biggs. Thanks for hanging out with us today.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Biggs, and thank you for hanging out with us today on the Food Garden Life Show. I'm a Gen Z gardener, author, speaker, and blogger, and my passion is growing tomatoes, trying new and unusual crops, and saving seeds. I'm also the author of the kids' gardening book, Gardening with Emma, and my co-host here on the show is my dad, Stephen.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Biggs, food gardening guy, horticulturist, author, and horticultural journalist. Today on the podcast, we talk about the idea of foodscaping, which is weaving edible plants into a landscape. You might also hear the term edible landscaping used for this kind of gardening, but as our guest Jeremy Cooper points out, that's more of a mouthful. As regular listeners know, along with information about gardening, we're interested in the paths people's lives take and how those paths intertwine with growing food and community. Today, Jeremy tells us how he worked in a number of jobs before focusing on foodscaping, and in hindsight, he sees that he was circling this intersection of food and gardening and caring for the land before he finally landed in that sweet spot of foodscaping. You can find Jeremy Cooper online at coopersfoodscaping.com. A shout out today to Nancy, who stopped by for some of Emma's tomato transplants, and Nancy, it was nice to meet you in person. A shout out to Mark in Burlington, who got a patch of ground at a friend's place to start a new vegetable garden this year. A shout out to Sherry, who dropped Emma a line after hearing the podcast. And a shout out to Donna, who's planning to binge listen to more podcasts as she gardens, and who also told us more about the Incredible Edibles project. Hello to our listeners on Reality Radio 101. We love your feedback, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, whether you're a podcast listener, a Reality Radio 101 listener. Drop us a line through foodgardenlife.com.
Do you have show ideas, questions, or feedback?
We want to hear what you think. So tell us. If you drop by foodgardenlife.com, you can email us, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we hang out under the handle Food Garden Life.
And you can also find me on Instagram as EmmaBiggs_grows, and you can also find me on my website, emmabiggs.ca.
And now, here is our chat with Jeremy Cooper from Cooper's Foodscaping in Toronto.
Jeremy, thank you so much for making time with us, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and we're excited to talk about foodscaping today. First off the bat, we thought we'd ask you to tell our listeners, what is foodscaping?
I chose the name Foodscaping because I saw a post on Facebook that was talking about neighborhoods working together to sort of blend their backyard gardens, and that seemed like a really awesome thing. I didn't really want to call myself a landscaper, and I also thought edible landscaping seemed like too much of a mouthful, so Foodscaping is the name I chose. Now, what is it? I would call it just growing edible plants in gardens. Like I try to, instead of using a perennial that's just a nice flower, I try to use a perennial that's a nice flower that maybe you can also use as tea, or that might be tasty in a soup, something like that. So trying to use plants that have multiple functions for us and to help build up the soil and the biodiversity and hopefully feed people in the process.
So, can you talk a little bit more about your journey and how you ended up foodscaping?
And I think I mentioned to Emma, you have an interesting background from being in the green roofing industry, landscaping, farming, gardening. How did it bring you to this point?
I think it's kind of always been circling this point. So my first job was on an organic farm up in Chatsworth, Ontario, and I worked there for a few summers, and then I came to Toronto and I started going to university, kept a garden there and stuff, and then in the summers I did a number of different jobs. I worked in lawn care. I worked for a couple of landscapers doing like I guess sort of commercial landscaping where they're just having hundreds of petunias or something and just tossing them in the ground, and then they all die and you replace them next year. It's kind of a meat grinder in that way.
Yeah.
But so I was doing that for a bit, and then I was doing some like maintenance stuff, like property maintenance, cutting the grass and that kind of thing. I worked at Evergreen Brickworks for a bit. Basically, I started like circling gardening, and eventually I worked with Buffco, the backyard urban farm company.
Yes, they've joined us on the show before.
Yeah, I worked for them for a couple of years, and I really liked growing food. I really liked gardening. I learned a lot, and that kind of really pushed me in the direction of like food gardening, I guess, as something that I was good at and something that I liked doing. Right before COVID, I started working at Ginkgo Sustainability, which is a company that does green roofs, and they hired me on as a installer on the roofs, but also as a project manager, like in training. I got to see a little of both sides in the office work and how they install the green roofs on roofs, and that was pretty cool. I liked it. I liked being up high, like downtown Toronto, like way up, rolling out these veg mats, that are just like sedums and lightweight soil mixture. So that was exciting and cool. And then COVID hit, and I didn't want to work on a construction site if there was a deadly virus going around. So they let me go. And then once we kind of came out of lockdown the first time, I was ready to go with my own business, which also I should mention, I was doing that, like doing my own business on the side, I guess, for a few years.
So you've had all your jobs seem to be focused around plants. Has your love for plants and being outside, has that been a lifelong thing, or is that something that you stumbled into?
No, it's been a lifelong thing. I've been an outdoorsy kind of person as long as I can remember. Where I grew up in Owen Sound, Ontario, near Tobermory, kind of. There's nature everywhere, It's just, so I was always camping, or we went on a lot of canoe trips as a kid. I had a big backyard with like a gully and a forest and stuff, so spent a lot of time just out there playing around.
Okay.
Building forts and whatnot. So anyway, I've just always been interested in nature, I guess. I really loved all the nature books when I was a kid, with all, the pictures and learning about the trees and birds and all that. So always felt really fascinated by that stuff. And, I've always thought that trees are this amazing thing that we take for granted, but like I don't know. It's sometimes I think like we're the fish in a giant coral reef, that the medium is air instead of water, And when I think of it like that, I look up at the trees and go, "Wow, that is wild." So yeah, I've always been interested in that kind of thing, and I've always loved the outdoors, and I've always kind of given a toss about nature,
Now, something you said, Jeremy, caught my attention. You were talking about the hundreds of petunias when you worked in that area. And I wanted to ask you just about what you've noticed about the awareness of foodscaping in the general world of landscaping. Do you find that many people are tuned into that, or is it still a fairly specialized thing?
I'm not super plugged into the world of landscaping anymore. When I was, no, I don't think it was, like 5 years ago, I don't think people knew or cared. And there's kind of like, what I've noticed a bit of a divide almost in the landscaping world. That's there's a lot of landscapers that do like interlocking and brickwork and patios and like I guess like perennial flowers and stuff like that. With they're using machines and they're doing stonework and building pools and stuff, and like that's one area of landscaping. And then there's another one which is more gardening focused, and they're just like helping grow vegetables or building raised beds and stuff. And there seems to be not a lot of people doing both, if that makes sense.
So we talked about foodscaping and how it's basically having maybe a more ornamental garden, we'll say, and putting different food crops in there. So for people
Mm-hmm.
who are interested in doing this in their garden, what are some of your top tips for people who want to get started?
Well, I would say don't be afraid to dream. I think a lot of people are, at least in the clients that I've had, I kind of will throw an idea out there and they're like, "Oh, wow, I didn't even think about that." And I was, to it seems like we're very stuck, I guess, in the kind of like we want our nice flowers and we want the beds to be square and we want like there's a sort of mentality that like if this is where the garden is when I moved in and bought the house, this is where the garden stays, and we got to keep the lawn, you know. Not many people consider how much you can really do with a small amount of space or whatever. Like if you have a lawn, I feel like a lot of people never consider removing any of it or that you can do something different with that space. So people are often sort of like, well, what do you suggest for this little garden bed here? You can have ideas for that, but don't be afraid to think like, what long term, what do I want to see on this space? Like some fruit trees or some, a feature, a patio, whatever. It doesn't have to be a lawn, I guess. It's really, I'm really just harping on lawns, I guess.
That's okay. We think like you do. So we could say you're a foodscaper slash dreamer, helping people see opportunities.
That's a very, yes, that's a very kind.
So
Sure.
dreaming is a top tip that you have for people. And are there a
Yeah,
couple other tips that you have for people who are excited about this idea of foodscaping, but they don't quite know how to start?
pick foods you like and look at your soil. Make sure your soil is healthy.
Mm.
A lot of people there's so many subdivisions going up now, and so like these row homes and new homes and stuff, and the soil sucks.
Yeah.
Basically, in it, even if a subdivision's old, like 20 or maybe 20 years old is fine, but under 20 years old, it's often like they level everything and compact the crap out of it and then put some topsoil on top, and our soil is so important. And if you want to grow nice things, your main thing is soil. Dig down, like dig below the level of the topsoil that's on your property, I think, and see like what it's like underneath. Because I've dug down a bunch to plant people's trees and stuff, and underneath it's like stony and gravel and clay, and like clay's not bad really, but when it's really hard and compacted, plants don't like that very much.
So if you're in a new subdivision, dig down below that 2 inches of topsoil that they gave you with your new house.
Yeah, and start by adding a bunch of compost and dry leaves, that kind of thing. Mix it all in before you start to really plant and try to get the most out of it, because your plants are going to struggle and you might not know why. Another thing I would say, if I may, is that have good energy. Like I have a client who has a really tiny, shady backyard, um, but she grows so much stuff. She has a giant cherry tree and a whole bunch of vegetables and flowers and all these things in places that seem like they're too cramped and they're not enough sun, and you know, but she she's a energy worker. If you know, however you feel about it, doesn't matter. She's an energy worker, and she talks to her plants and she loves them on purpose, and they grow really well. So that's another key thing.
And so it sounds as if she's doing what people say that she can't really do in a small space anyway. Is that right?
Yeah, I think if you try like listed all the things she's growing, you know, people would kind of be like, no, 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 you can't put all that stuff in one space, and you know, whatever. But there's not going to be enough sunlight and whatever, and that's not always true. And so much of it has to do with your intention and your energy.
When it comes to the actual plants, are there a few top or favorites of yours that you think work really great in a foodscape?
I really like service berry, which has lovely little berries. They come around in June or so, and people use them as ornamentals a lot because they have really nice flowers. And I've been to a number of people's properties where they have a service berry tree, but they don't know that they can eat them. And I'm just like, hey, do you know you can eat those? Like, you take a bunch, and they try them, and they're like, oh wow, these are, they're very tasty berries. So
Mm.
I really like service berry, and they're also excellent as an understory tree because they don't need full sun, so you can place them in different spots and they'll still do well. I also really like amaranth because it's beautiful, and colorful, and it's a grain. Also really into currants and blueberries. Both of those are lovely. I really like bergamot and yarrow for herbs.
Mm.
Lovely flowers, pollinators, useful in tea and medicine. And squashes like butternut squash. We grew one last year that had like I think we got 12 or 13 squashes off one plant. So that was
Wow.
cool.
You're listing a few of the things we love too. We're big fans of currants and service berries, and yeah.
And hopefully blueberries soon. I've been bugging Dad about
Yeah,
that.
the pressure's on. Get blueberries, Dad.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I have a whole bunch I have to plant still.
You were talking about the idea of the service berry as an understory tree, and it just got me thinking in permacultural terms
Mm.
and layers, and I know that permaculture is something that you think about in your foodscaping. I wonder if we can touch on that a bit.
Yeah. Well, I am not certified as a permaculture designer. Maybe I shouldn't advertise that, but I would like to be at some point. Having worked with Layla for several years, and done a lot of my own reading, etc., I've learned a fair bit about permaculture methods. So I try to incorporate them as much as I, is reasonable or that I can. Sometimes, it's not always doesn't always make sense for some clients who just want me to pull a bunch of weeds or whatever, even though I'm like, you can eat these, right? And they're like, yeah, what, I don't care, get them out of here. So there's some of that happens, so that I wouldn't really say I'm doing permaculture then, but I do try to use what's around. I try to turn people towards the things that they consider weeds often, and I've had some people who decide to keep X plant because I tell them, like, that's food, or this is useful in some other way. You don't just have to pull it because you don't know what it is. So yeah, I use that. I like to the stacking functions that happens in permaculture, the various functions of plants, the layers in the food forest concept. Like, it's all good stuff.
I wanted to ask you too about the idea of mentors and people influencing you, because
Mm,
you've mentioned Layla a couple times as we're
yeah,
talking. And I thought, oh, our listeners won't know Layla necessarily. So why don't we just digress a little bit and talk about how she's influenced you and how you connected?
Leila Mirskandari is a permaculture designer. I met her through a guy I knew with Transition Toronto, which is a nonprofit focused on sustainability in the GTA. She hired me to build one of her designs for her own house. From then on, we've kind of worked together. She liked my work, and she said, like, you're good at this, you should keep doing it, and not really work for me, but like we can help each other, like she does designs, and then she will recommend me as the guy to build them to her clients. So that's been a relationship that started, I think, in 2017. I come to her with questions, or through the course of building her designs, I've learned, I guess, most of the principles involved in the permaculture that she's using, and so we do things with hugel cultures and sheet mulching, and yeah, she's been a great influence on me. She was the one really that was saying, like, you should start your own business, and you should definitely, she's kind of pushed me in this direction, and she also checks me when I have a negative attitude.
Ah,
When I went and saw her a couple weeks ago, and I was quoting her on some raised beds, and I was telling her, like, I'm super swamped, oh my god, I have so much work going on, and she was like, hey, stop it, like, this is what you love to do, right? Yes, so then shut up, stop complaining, it was nicer than that, but still, she's really good at having good good vibes, I guess. She's really good at staying positive and seeing the good in situations, and even if something goes wrong, she's like, oh no, that's fine, it's supposed to be like that, we just work with it. So she's been a great force that has propelled me towards my own business, for one thing, and two, towards you know keeping a better attitude about life.
that's
Okay.
what we all need in a mentor too, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, let's jump into your business. It's
Sure.
Cooper's Foodscaping.
It is.
And could you let us know? I think you've told us already how you got started,
Mm.
but tell us what you're doing.
I'm doing sort of edible landscapes, broadly, but really that means, like, I can do designs for your garden or your space. I can help you with planting plans. I can help you just grow vegetables. I can build raised beds out of stone or wood. I can do patios and stuff too. I do kind of both. I do some of the landscaping that the bigger guys with machines can do, and I do a lot of just gardening and helping people. So I'm also offering consultations, and keep wanting to say counseling, but that's not right. Something.
Garden counseling, it almost sounds like there's a psychology piece to that.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll get there. So anyway, I just like helping people to sort of, if they already have a garden, to kind of be like, well, what are some ways that you can maximize this? What's a different way to think about this, so that you're not stressing about all the weeds? Instead, approach it from a place of abundance. It might be, so you're not fighting nature all the time.
Hmm.
So offering those kind of things. I also I have a product that I'm offering, which is a barrel planter that's designed originally for being indoors.
And so those planters, I was looking at those. It's
Mhm.
neat because they're sub irrigation planters,
Yep.
and there are some really ugly sub irrigation planters out in the world, and these look really nice.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, well, there are some ugly ones, correct. There are also some pretty ones, and I would say, yes, mine are pretty.
Yeah, yeah.
and designed for, like, I was thinking about condos. I'd really like to one day, like, if we can just step aside for a second. I used to walk around downtown Toronto thinking about, like, how cool would it be if in every condo tower, one floor was dedicated to indoor gardening, like hydroponics, aquaponics, that kind of thing, that could produce food for those in the condo, and they pay into it like a CSA. Wouldn't that be awesome? I would love to be part of something like that. Anyway, that's speaking of dreams. There you go.
Great. Hey, if we don't dream, we won't change the world.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I walk around too and I look at different places and I say, oh, there should be a garden here, or imagine if this happened. So I'm the same.
Yeah, nice. We're actually, I'm in the process of, this is a good chance for a plug possibly, in the process of trying to get a community farm with using permaculture, fruit trees, etc., started in Rexdale. It's called the Tandridge Community Farm. But I'm sort of consulting with a number of community leaders and organizers and park people, working on getting that started. We've got permission from the TRCA to use a piece of land along the Humber River, and we're still waiting for permission from the city.
Okay. So Tandridge Farm.
Yeah.
That's exciting
Tandridge
news.
Community Farm. Yeah, you can, keep an ear to the ground. You'll be hearing about it soon enough, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Excellent.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Jeremy, if people want to know more about what you do or to connect, how can they find you online?
You can find me at coopersfoodscaping.com.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom and making time for us today.
Oh, I appreciate it, and you guys are very generous. Thank you.
That was our chat with Jeremy Cooper from Cooper's Foodscaping in Toronto, and you can find Jeremy online at coopersfoodscaping.com. What did you think? I was struck by Jeremy's sense that he was circling this food gardening niche before he started his business, and I was also struck by how a good mentor helped him focus his passion and helped him keep on track. Mentorship is important. Find a mentor, but also try to be a mentor to others too. Jeremy said, don't be afraid to dream, as he was sharing his top foodscaping tips. I thought that this was really interesting because many people might share an actual gardening practice or tip, but he steps right back to look at the big picture. I like this, and when I teach classes, I encourage my students to dream big. As we wrap up today's episode, I'm remembering a mentor who taught me a lot about the power of food to build community, and a mentor who always challenged me to think about food from a different perspective that I hadn't before considered. The late Wayne Roberts was a guest on this show, and he mentored many, many people. One person can make a big difference in the world, and he did. And along with food, he was a role model to many people with his really irrepressible joy in life. If this episode piqued your interest in foodscaping and edible landscaping, you might like our other episodes on the topic. And in March 2021, we chatted with Urban Seedling in Montreal. And in February 2021, we chatted with the folks at Buffco in Toronto, the Backyard Urban Farm Company. The podcast is back next Thursday. We head to Montreal to hear about an initiative that weaves together urban food gardening and community. You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show. I'm Stephen Biggs.
And I'm Emma Biggs. Thanks for tuning in.